If you have a Bible and you find it helpful, please turn in it to Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7. This is where we begin today. If we were to go around this room and ask everybody to give your definition of what faith is, I mean, many of us in here are very familiar with the quotation from Hebrews, which defines it in a biblical sense. I think we could all state that. But I just wonder if we really understand what that means, truly. A lot of times the biblical definitions, while they're very helpful, and I fully believe them, they sometimes don't capture for us what it is we mean when we use such a word. Faith is exercised by believers in a very distinct way, and I would say, as one who thinks about things this way, faith is a capacity that God has instilled in the human being. That we have a capacity, it's the means by which we reach out to Him. If we didn't have that capacity, I don't know that we could reach God. There would be some other word we would use that would talk about that. But I want you, as we go through the sermon today, I want you to keep this picture in your mind, if you would. And by the way, it's Luke chapter 7. I remember when Jackson was just a little peanut. He's a very large peanut now at 6'4", but back then he was small. And we fed him, and now he's larger. But I remember his favorite thing to do. There's a picture. Becky took a picture. We had a YMCA in Kennett Square that was right down the street from the house, and brand new, just put the pool in. His favorite thing for me to do with him when he was really small was to throw him up and catch him. He loved that. I remember one time we'd moved to Waycross, and by now he's 2 years old. He's a little heavier. And then we were in Old Time Country Buffet, and it didn't take long before the drumsticks were burning, throwing him up and down. I mean, he enjoys it a lot longer than I had the capacity to keep throwing him. But there's something about that in a child that I think captures our relationship with God in a way that I want us to keep in mind throughout this sermon. The child being thrown up, it never even occurs to them that they're not going to be caught. They never even question that for a second. They just laugh and enjoy the process of being thrown up and caught. Keep that in mind. Why does the infant enjoy that as we go through this today? I'm begin reading in verse 1 of chapter 7. When Jesus had finished all of this, in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum, which you may know is his headquarters. There was a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, and who was sick and was about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some of the Jewish elders to Jesus, asking him to come and heal the servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with Jesus, "This man deserves to have you do this for him, because he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue." So Jesus went with them. Jesus was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends out to say to Jesus, "Lord, don't trouble yourself. I don't deserve for you to come under my roof. That is why I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you myself. But say the word, my servant will be healed. I am myself one who is under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one to go, and he goes. I tell another one to come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at the centurion. And turning to the crowd that followed him, he said to them all, "I tell you the truth, I have not found such great faith, even in Israel." Then the ones who had been sent to Jesus returned to the house and found the servant of the centurion well. This centurion is believing in the same way that Jackson believed I would catch him. He's just come to Jesus and said, "I want you to heal my servant, whom I love." Centurions were a very unique group of people in the Roman Empire, in the Roman military. The word centurion means 100. That means that they were in charge of 100 people under them. And Polybius, who was a Roman historian who wrote around the early 1st century, middle 2nd century BC, wrote of the Roman centurion in some of his Roman history, and he said this: "They are not seekers after danger. They're men who can command. They're steady in action. They're very reliable. They're not over anxious to rush into a fight. They're not reckless. But when hard pressed, they will hold their ground and they are willing to die at their posts. Now that's the kind of character that this person had to have, this man, in order to be chosen as a Roman centurion. That's very significant in this text today. They were chosen very, very carefully. And it was very common for a Roman centurion to be one of economic means because they were paid well. And if this Roman centurion had been one for any length of time, he was in a good position. He was stationed, apparently, in Capernaum, which was a big deal because that meant he wasn't one that was being sent to the far-flung reaches of the Roman Empire in order to defend its borders, which meant he'd been probably one for a while. You know, when soldiers get older, they're rewarded a little bit by their rank. And the Roman Empire probably had rewarded this guy and said, look, you just stay here at Capernaum, have a home, raise your family, do what you need to do, and we'll continue to pay you as a centurion. He treated his slave in an unusual way for the Roman centurion to treat a slave. And the fact that he has a slave tells me that my assessment of where he was in life was probably correct, because most military people didn't automatically have slaves. And to have a slave meant you had a home. You had something there that needed taken care of. The slave in the Roman Empire, although it's not like slavery in the South, there still were laws that governed slavery. And one of them was, if you owned one, you could do whatever you wanted with them. They had no rights because they were what was known as chattel. That is, they were a living tool. Aristotle talked about slaves as living tools. Aristotle, that great thinker and great giver of all things ethical in our culture still to this day, he looked at people in a very stratified way, and for him the slave was just a living tool. In the Roman Empire it was the same. So an owner could mistreat the slave, could work the slave to death, and if the owner killed the slave because of dissatisfaction, there were no laws that caused the owner to have any, there was no retribution whatsoever. Owner could kill the slave and that would be it. You need to go get another one. Now, once the slave got too old to work, you were it was okay if you just tossed them out to their own devices. They're no longer able to serve you, and so you could get rid of them. So they literally were. It's like a lawnmower. I was talking to Ed about our old lawnmower that the deck had gotten so rusty that the wheel mounts were coming loose and it couldn't serve us anymore. So what did I do? I didn't go take it to the doctor. I got rid of it. And you could do that with a slave at this time in the Roman Empire. Very significant. This centurion was unique to the Jews in a certain way. What does it mean when it says he built us our synagogue? It meant that he petitioned Rome for funds so that that synagogue could be contracted out and built for the Jewish people. You see, the Romans didn't hate religion. We get that picture all wrong when we think about persecutions of Christianity. The persecution was not one long nightmare. It was spotty. It happened and then it was good for a while. Then it happened and it was good. Well, at this time in history, the Jews, even though they were clamorous, as some of the Roman historians wrote, and difficult to manage, there were a lot of Romans who loved the Jews. And this was one of them. You think, well, why would a Roman with Zeus and all the rest of the mob love the Jews? Well, the same reason that Socrates liked the one God. Because he looked at Zeus and the rest of the mob and said, these guys are worse than we are. So when this centurion meets the God of the Jews, he meets what? Perfection. He meets someone who is utterly dependable. If I pray to the God of the Jews, he will hear me. He will answer my prayer because he really is just as they portray him to be. Utterly loving, utterly just. I mean, for the Roman, this was an amazing gift, given the comparison with the Roman gods. And the Romans liked religion in general. One of the Roman historians wrote about it this way. He says, to the people, all of the religions are equally true, which means whatever a person believed, they believed it to be so. For the philosophers, all the religions are equally false. But for the government, all of the religions are equally useful because they pacified the people. You remember Mark's statement, religion is the opiate of the society. So it kept people happy if they had something like this, a religious expression. But this centurion's different. He really believes. He really believes. This Roman, think of him, here you've got this Roman who is of stature in the Roman Empire. He's not just a nobody. And yet, he looks at this Jewish peasant, Jesus, and sees something in him that says, this is a person I need to speak with. This person has something for me and for my family. The Romans looked at Judaism in its practice as kind of barbaric. The Roman understanding of worship was first of all very expressive. You went to the temple, you might engage with the temple women there in a unique way, which had a tremendous attraction. You could see where the attraction might be there for the Roman guy. If you've got a temple full of women who are just there for you, well, you could see why that might be an attractive way to go and worship, as they might see it. They looked at Judaism as a place of great barbarism because they saw the sacrificial system. Did you know the Jews kept a herd of about 200,000 sheep near the temple just for the sacrifices? You had 2 a day. So there are 2 lambs, spotless lambs, have to be brought in, males. You got to have a lot of sheep to get that many every day, and they've got to be spotless males. So they had a 200,000 herd outside the temple just for this purpose. And the Romans looked at that and said, this is barbaric. These sacrifices, what are they doing? But here's a Roman who sees it differently. This is amazing to me when I think about this Roman who sees all of this in this different way. He sends the Jewish elders. That was very unusual. For him to go to the Jews as elders and then send them from the synagogue to Jesus, to get Jesus to do this favor for him, was an unusual thing. And of course the elders, they beat a path to this centurion because the centurion had built them a synagogue. This man who is accustomed to commanding is now asking these clamorous, barbaric Jews for a favor for himself. The centurion has become enamored, clearly, with Jewish monotheism. There's one God who is utterly dependable. And the Jewish system offered that austerity, that faithfulness, the dependability, that rock. If I have a need, I can pray and this God Yahweh will hear me. The Jewish elders, they're looking at the centurion from the outside. They see the qualities of the centurion, that he's done these nice things for them. There was a time in history, and this is that time, when people looked at things in a face value way. We don't do that anymore because we've got just so much information about everything. We don't have to. You got some movie star's face on the cover of a magazine and they're going to tell us all about the intricacies of their life as though that we know them. This is not a time like that. This was a time when if you knew something, you really knew it. They looked at a pond and if they could see down to the bottom, they believed the water was safe to drink because it was clear. That's how they thought. And so when the centurion looks at the Jewish God, when the Jews look at the centurion, they're looking at each other on the basis of what they know. And so this centurion, just like a child from his experience with the Jewish people and their God, has really believed, and he believes that Jesus can do what he believes Jesus can do on the basis of his own authority. He knows what his life is like. I command this when he goes. I command this when he comes. I say to my servant, do this. He does it. Jesus, you're like that. You can command the universe and it will obey. Think about what this centurion's seen in Jesus all by himself. God has shown something to this centurion that this centurion could not have known otherwise. Look at the centurion's reaction. First of all, he sees himself as unworthy for this Jew to enter his home. That tells me a lot. That tells me that he understands Jewish law, that a Jew cannot come into the household of a Gentile. You couldn't do it if you were a Jew, and especially a rabbi. Just can't do that. He also sees himself even as unworthy to come to Jesus and ask him for this. This centurion sees himself for the way all of us should see ourselves, as sinners. Sinners. We have nothing in us that commends us to God. Jesus responds to that utterly broken and contrite heart. David, in the midst of all that he was going through with Bathsheba, after Nathan calls him out, he writes Psalm 51. And in prophecy, he says the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit. A broken and a contrite heart you will never turn away. So faith is something different than we think. It's different. It's assurance based on evidence. That's what this centurion had. He had assurance based on evidence. And it's not something that you can divvy up in a test tube. You know, God's not going to sit down in a test tube like litmus paper and change color. Lucky you, I'm here, you found me. He's not going to do that. We have to come to Him in some way. Some way. How is it we come to Him? We come to Him with what William James calls precursive faith. What is that? We're coming to Him with a sense of belief that He's actually there to listen and that He'll hear us. That's exactly what this centurion does when he comes to Jesus. He believes that Jesus is there, but he also believes that Jesus will hear him. I just want to pass this on to you as an encouragement, all of us in this room. We do not realize it because we're so used to it. What an incredible act of faith, precursive, it is to close your eyes and speak to the Maker of the universe as though He's there and listening. We take it for granted, but it's not something to take for granted. It's the most amazing thing in all of human experience. We close our eyes, we speak to the Maker of the universe, and He hears us. That is tremendous faith on our part. And God rewards it every time. Every time. And I want to pass this on to you as an encouragement as well. That's all we can do. That's all we can do. That's why the requirement isn't an intellectual requirement. It's merely the precursive faith that says, I believe. Listen to me, God, and He'll hear us. And that all boils down to and rests upon what David said, a broken and a contrite heart. Those components are all part of this, and they're all important. C.S. Lewis said it well. He said there's one essential symptom of a regenerated life. That life is permanently horrified at the perception of one's natural and, it seems, unalterable corruption. We see ourselves for who we are. This centurion did it. The true Christian's nostrils should be continually attentive to the inner cesspool, a broken and contrite heart. And God will always respond to the sinner's cry. Why? The Jews had a word, chesed. Chesed. You have to do that throat thing. Chesed. What is chesed? Faithfulness. They believed that. God's chesed was always sufficient such that they could approach Him, and when they did, He would hear. This centurion sees Jesus that way. And this is the beauty of God's offer. It bypasses the intellect. It doesn't dismiss it. It doesn't say, okay, check your brains at the door and then come to me. He's not saying that at all. He's saying go beyond it. Go beyond the logical. Go beyond the intellectual. Come to me because I am, because you believe that I am, and I will answer that belief. Always. Why? Because He's chesed. He's always faithful to do it. So this centurion, this man of position, comes to Jesus, this Palestinian peasant. He believes that Jesus can heal with a word at a distance. Why? Because he believes Jesus is chesed. That He's faithful. He's going to listen. And he's got a broken and contrite heart who sees himself for who he really is. Not worthy for Jesus to come to him at all. Not even worthy to go to Jesus. And I just say his faith has found a resting place. So I ask all of us today, has our individual faith found a resting place? Are we one that can say to ourselves internally, think now, only you and I know this, can we say to ourselves internally, without any fear of lying to ourselves or deceiving ourselves, I have come to Jesus for forgiveness? Can we say that? Now, only God and us know that. We're the only ones and God that know that. But why live with the tension when you've got a God in heaven who is Hesed, who wants to relieve that tension? He does not want us to walk in that tension, not even for a minute. There's no reason to. Because look at the price that was paid to relieve the tension for you and me. God didn't have to do that for himself. He's cool. Everything's good with God. He doesn't need you. He doesn't need me. He doesn't even need the universe. So he's not making that offer in order that he would feel better. He's making that offer because he's making an offer so that we will feel better. That the tension will be removed. Why not? Why not be just like the infant who's thrown in the air, who utterly trusts that the adult is not going to drop them? God is like that. He will not drop us. He'll catch us every time. I don't know where everybody is, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question, you want to pray with me, I'll stay here as long as it takes as we close.